Hi guys, Chris here with Super Savvy Travelers. Hey, our travel day is looming. I understand there's 5 more sleeps before we head off to Italy. So I wanted to give you an update on some of the things that we're kind of running into and seeing and finding, and it's really not a simple process at all anymore now with this virus. So initially, as we're going over, we had to find flights that were COVID-free flights because we just don't have the option of quarantining for 14 days when we get there. So that was a little bit tricky. You have to COVID test before you get on a plane from JFK, New York, to Rome. And then you have to test again when you arrive in Rome. Now, depending on what kind of test you get and who you're flying with and what flight you're on, you could either get a PCR test or a rapid test. Now, the one that we're going on requires a rapid test that cannot be over 48 hours old. Some of them require the PCR test that cannot be over 72 hours old, but the PCR tests take longer to get the results, and sometimes you just don't get them in time. So for us, that was not really an option. So we're going to test before we go, get a rapid test before we go and see if we can make it in the deadline. It would be good to know before we end up in JFK, and if something tests positive or something, obviously we'll want to know before we get on a plane. So we're going to do that. So there might be 3 tests in our future. I hope our noses are ready for it. Anyway, another interesting tidbit that came up is we're working with Nick Mehta's office on making sure that all our documents are in place before we go. And we have a lot of reasons to travel, so we don't anticipate there's going to be any trouble. But there came up a thing, because we're traveling with somebody else, about the rental car contract. Now, we have to have private transport down to Calabria. The zones are still restricted and whatnot, and it's a little weird and a little very unclear, very confusing. But the bottom line is we needed to have a car rental contract so that we can show that we're taking private transport down. But the car rental contract had to be in all 3 of our names because I guess they figure that Pete could just leave us stranded at the airport or whatever. You know, whenever there's any sort of wrinkle or any sort of question mark or links that aren't tightly linked together on this whole chain of documents, it could create problems. I'm not saying it will, but it could. So let's just say we're really happy we're working with Nick on this because there's just a lot to it. We're hoping that after June 2nd, when things open up a little more, it's going to be a lot easier. Hopefully the regions will be out of the red zone and the orange zones and things like that, so we can travel a little bit more freely and not have to have all this documentation with us. We will be documenting our trip the whole way, probably from before we get on the plane here in Sacramento to when we get to JFK, to when we test, and when we fly over, and when we land in Rome, and then of course the drive down, which will be really exciting because we will have made it through all the barriers. Anyway, stay tuned. We're going to give you a live boots on the ground update on what it's like to travel during this really weird time in Italy, and I hope you find it helpful and enlightening, and I hope we find it simple and fun. So I'll see you guys very soon.